Good morning, Don, and thank you for this chance to talk about Mainfreight's great strategic challenges. The company is located at a very historic place on the portage between the two harbours, Manukau and Waitemata, and right on the rail line, as we can hear. That intermodal sense is obviously key to the business strategy.
Oh, absolutely. We see ourselves as multimodal here in New Zealand, but we're trying to do the same in Australia, in Europe and in America. And we're finding it working in those other countries, but not nearly as successful as here. And of course we base ourselves here because we can still smell the diesel and see the freight. And I think the day you see us in a downtown office in Auckland City is the day we've lost the plot.
You've got great balance in the business between US, Europe and Australasia, but Asia remains the smaller part of that network. Do you have some big ambitions for it?
Oh, we're an ambitious bunch of people, there's no doubt about that. Of course. And what you see publicly in terms of revenue that's declared is only the revenue that's created within Asia. There is a lot more traded, but of course the freight is paid in Australia, New Zealand or the USA or Europe for that matter, so therefore we can't double count it. So it's actually bigger than what you see in terms of what we declare publicly for revenue earned. But it is a big business and we have a lot more work to do within China to grow a customer base from within China to the rest of the world.
And so what's the split in employees between New Zealand and the rest of the world?
I think we have about 1,850 employees here in New Zealand, and in total we've got 6,915 at the last count, which was yesterday, based around the rest of the world. So that includes our driving fleet, so our owner drivers in New Zealand, Australia and America.
How do you describe Mainfreight's culture and how do you spread it to all those nationalities around the world?
Well, it's Mainfreight's culture, and culture will beat strategy every day, and we work hard at developing that culture, but it's an inclusive culture. It's one of a decentralised business, one where we give responsibility to those closest to the customer. And I guess the biggest challenge we have is to replicate that culture in those other countries. When you take over a business, particularly say in the likes of Europe, which was run by one owner and an accountant, and he held all the information to himself, the people didn't know whether they made any money or lost money, to a business that decentralises that responsibility and gives responsibility to local branch managers for them to put the P&L, the weekly P&L, up on the cafeteria board for everybody to see, then there are obstacles to overcome. But we're working at that, and we get them here to New Zealand to give them a blue injection now and again. And I think they get it. I think they enjoy that ability to have more responsibility, to have more say in the business, to have more say about its future. And I think that will be the winning combination for us as we grow the business.
Is there a New Zealand element to that culture that you take out to the world?
I'm not sure about that. You've got to be a little careful, and we made that mistake when we first went to Australia, is that we thought that we could say to them, this is the way we do it in New Zealand, and of course the Australians answered, well, we don't really care, we're Australian and we'll do it our way. So we learnt a lot of lessons going to Australia, and we've taken those lessons to the other countries. I think we have to adjust the culture to meet the nation's requirements of the country we're in, but the basic disciplines, the open plan offices, the attitude towards quality, the decentralised responsibilities that we have with our people, the weekly P&Ls, the cleanliness, the tidiness, the respect of the customer, the respect of our people, the way we build our buildings, those things don't differ. But there might be some subtle changes that make it a Mainfreight Asian culture or a Mainfreight European culture. We've learned a lot. I mean, if you think that the Aussies and the Kiwis are difficult to deal with, then you only have to think about trying to deal with the Dutch, the Belgians and the Germans. That's not easy. They're different cultures in each country. But our style is to try and be inclusive and allow them to contribute to the success of the business.
Coming back to New Zealand, what are the main issues here, and particularly where does the government need to invest in transport infrastructure?
I think we've lagged, and the growth of the country has outstripped the infrastructure investment, and both from a roading perspective and a rail perspective. What we know is that we just can't continue to build more roads. We need to use rail as an alternative. And we see it as the second corridor, really, and not just for freight, but for passenger. And those debates around light rail to the airport, as an example here in Auckland City, are important. And I think it's a way to actually take away the congestion that we've got on the roads. But we've found rail to be extremely accommodating and an extremely effective way to move freight in this country. We can get the same service levels that we have by road. And I think the country is now seeing, with the earthquake and the amount of freight that's had to transfer from rail to road to get around the earthquake zone between Picton and Kaikoura, our roads just can't cope with that volume. So for us, it's important that we have a rail infrastructure that continues to be invested in and continues to be effective. The government needs to think about that railway more than just more roads.
And just when we're starting to focus on reducing carbon emissions, KiwiRail is going backwards by replacing electric locomotives with diesel. What's your view on that?
Well, we would like to go greener, and in fact the lessons that we've learned in Europe is that we can actually run facilities on solar and that we can actually run with electric forklifts rather than diesel or gas-powered forklifts. And slowly we're bringing those changes to our New Zealand operations. I think KiwiRail's had to make a decision that they needed to be one or the other, and they've seen that they needed to move back to diesel in a means to get themselves sorted and operating profitably and functioning well with service levels for customers like ourselves, to then review what they do ultimately. But for us, we'd rather that it was electric than diesel.
In the great road versus rail debate, there are clearly some economic incentives that favour road versus rail. Would you see a case for levelling up that playing field?
I think rail can be competitive under its current arrangements. The fact of the matter is there's been a lack of investment in rail infrastructure since 1991, when rail was sold to private equity interests, and then under the ownership of our Australian friends there was still no investment in the infrastructure. Now we've got it back in New Zealand ownership under the government. They at least are catching up with that investment that needs to be made. I think the best way to attract freight to rail or volume to rail is to have a better port strategy in this country and to actually understand that the rail network is as viable as what the road network is, and that's up to KiwiRail to continue to service customers as best as they can with the infrastructure they have.
Mainfreight has a rather different style to corporate governance than some other major New Zealand companies. What's the difference? How does it work?
Well, I guess we are inclusive with the board like we are with the team. We take them to the business, so they would only meet here in Auckland once a year. The rest of their board meetings are around the world and in the business, seeing what's happening, meeting the customers, meeting the people, seeing the facilities and seeing the need for where the capital needs to be invested. Therefore, they're best informed to make those decisions. To want to change those directors on a regular basis of 5 to 7 years, which the establishment might wish, is counterintuitive to what we're trying to do. We're trying to build a long-term business here, one that has people in it that have long-term careers, likewise for around the board table. And those directors, with all due respect, it takes them some time to understand what is a complicated business.
Last year you appointed two very impressive chief financial officers to the board as directors. They are both women. How might that change the culture around the board table?
Oh, we're excited about it. It'll bring a change of thinking, I'm sure, around the table. And, we've had Kate and Sue on the board now since January. and already their contributions have been somewhat different and refreshing. So we're looking forward to their contribution over a long period of time.
One of those new directors is Sue Tyndall, who is also Chief Financial Officer of Auckland Council. Mainfreight has a lot to do with Auckland Council, so how do you ensure there is no conflict of interest should it arise?
Well, we'd like to have an interaction with the Auckland Council, but we wouldn't have had their transport business division executives here ever. So there is no communication with the Auckland Council, to be perfectly honest. So I don't see any conflict arising. Hopefully Sue will understand the difficulties that our business has trying to get around the Auckland City and bring some pressure to bear on the Auckland Council for the betterment of everybody.
So over all these years, you've never had someone from the council in strategy or planning come and ask you what you need as a major transport company here in Auckland?
Never. I mean, the good thing we had Phil Goff come and see us, but he was on the campaign trail. Have we seen him since? Of course not.
Mainfreight's very big on owner-operators for truck drivers. Why do you do that, and what's the benefit?
Well, it's an asset-light model, and it gives us a businessman or a businesswoman to be able to be more effective, more industrious. They have a better customer relationship. They realise that if they don't service the customer as well as we wish, that we could lose the customer, therefore they lose their revenue. So it's a model which has worked very well for us. The owner-drivers for us in New Zealand, Australia and America are extremely proud. They have their vehicles in the best condition that we could ask for. And it's great working with a bunch of business people that understand what the customer is all about and what service is all about.
Do you help them with that investment by helping to source the trucks at good prices? Is there some involvement there?
No, none whatsoever. I mean, again, it's not a core competency for us. We look to the driver to be able to fund himself and to arrange his own finance. Where we can, we'll buy fuel at the right price for them. We'll be able to negotiate rates for insurance and for tyres and for sign writing and the likes. And of course, more importantly, they'll be paid on time, all the time, on the same day every month. Unlike, if you think about the debate that's in the marketplace at the moment around large customers, large businesses here in New Zealand wanting 90 to 120 day credit terms. We pay our drivers on the 15th of the month every month, just like we pay all our creditors on the 20th of the month every month, and in our view, just like a good business should. And to have this other thing coming over the fence at us, where customers, some of our largest companies in New Zealand, thinking that they can extend credit terms that will have an impact on small business owners, is diabolical, and it's almost corruption, really, in our view. We see it as very poor business practice.
Next year, Mainfreight will celebrate its 40th anniversary. You're also a well-known company for having a 100-year view of the business. How does that work?
Well, the 100 years never finishes, but more importantly, rather than the number of years, it's about how we make our decisions, and it's about making long-term decisions rather than short-term decisions. That includes long-term careers for our people.